this report has a number of findings in it based on science and based on recommendations from other organizations. These are not specifically the recommendations of Utah Foundation, but we want to highlight them because we think they're worth discussing and worth considering in the policy environment. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Communications Director, Dan Baumas.
Thanks for coming. I really do appreciate you being here today. We wanted to talk about a broad range of things, but one of them that we're going to be talking about is the enforcement of the new seatbelt law passed by the Utah legislature in its last session. It takes effect on May 12th, and so that's why we've invited State Representative Lee Perry to join us, along with representatives of the Utah Highway Patrol and the Salt Lake City Police Department. But I'd like to introduce to you Melissa Proctor, who is the research analyst who worked on this report. One of the more interesting things she found is material from Utah Foundation's own archives. But I'll let her brief you on the findings, and then we'll hear from our law enforcement guests.
Thanks for being here. This driving report focuses on specific laws that improve traffic safety, such as seatbelts, booster seats, motorcycle helmets, and graduated licensing for teen drivers. Some of the findings in the report are very positive. For example, Utah has the optimal booster seat law. After the law was enacted in 2008, booster seat usage increased 46%, leading to greater safety for children in accidents. Despite extensive public campaigns in support of booster seat usage before the legislation, it was the legislation that seems to have been the key in improving usage. Utah also continues to have very low drunk driving rates. There are, of course, cultural reasons that are somewhat unique to Utah, but strong laws and strict enforcement also play a significant role. Other findings in the report might be surprising. Despite Utah's low drunk driving rates, for example, more than 25% of crash fatalities tested came back positive for drugs. Now, this includes everything from hydrocodone to methamphetamine, so it's difficult to determine in any given case whether the drugs found in a driver were the immediate cause of a motor vehicle accident, but nevertheless, it's a very high number, so it's noteworthy. Utah also has relatively high numbers of pedestrian fatalities. 39 pedestrians died in Utah last year alone. In some rankings, Utah's high pedestrian fatalities overcomes its good scores from drunk driving, unfortunately. Utah ranks between 23rd and 25th in the nation for pedestrian fatalities. Utah currently has a partial motorcycle helmet law, which requires only riders younger than 18 years old to wear headgear. The Centers for Disease Control has found that partial helmet laws actually decrease helmet use, even among young riders who are required to wear helmets. It turns out that partial helmet laws complicate enforcement, since officers might find it difficult to determine the age of a potential violator. Young riders know this and are less likely to comply with the law as a result. So a universal law would increase helmet use, even among young riders who are required to wear them. It would reduce fatalities and injuries and save taxpayer dollars. Speaking of young riders, or drivers, Utah's current graduated licensing program for teen drivers is missing 4 of the 7 provisions that are recommended by safety experts. So one example is that Utah's driving restriction begins at midnight and goes till 5 a.m., but studies show that most accidents involving teen drivers happen between 9 p.m. and midnight. So some safety groups would recommend Utah expand the nighttime restriction. Another example, Utah limits passengers for teen drivers to 6 months. Limiting passengers for teen drivers is known to lead to fewer accidents, especially for 16 or 17-year-old drivers. So limiting passengers for a year instead of just 6 months might also be a good change. The report puts special emphasis on distracted driving. Of course, there are many different kinds of distracted driving, from eating to personal grooming, but distracted driving most commonly involves cell phone use. Now, a cell phone can distract a driver in any number of ways, visually, manually, or cognitively. Each of these kinds of distraction can impair driving performance. The current law prohibits manipulating a device while driving, and it makes the tacit assumption that only tasks which take our eyes off the road interfere with driving. The law continues to allow, for example, the manual distraction inherent in holding a cell phone to your ear. Interestingly, new research indicates that cognitive distraction can be just as dangerous as visual and manual distraction on the road. Studies show that phone calls using a hands-free device while driving can cause a cognitive impairment equivalent to handheld phone calls, and that driving while talking on a cell phone, even on a hands-free device, can be as dangerous as driving drunk. Last but not least, during the recent legislative session, the Utah legislature made the state's seatbelt law enforceable as a primary offense. Seatbelt use saves lives. Seatbelt laws increase seatbelt use. And seatbelt laws that are enforceable as a primary offense increase seatbelt use more substantially than any other kind of law. These effects have been found to be immediate and permanent. Still, interestingly, a poll last month by UtahPolicy.com found that almost 50% of Utahns don't approve of a primary seatbelt law. This is an indication that more public outreach and education is needed on this issue. The graph to my left shows that according to the poll, more women favor this law than men, older people favor this law more than younger people, and those with graduate degrees favor it more than those with less education. The facts are indisputable. States that have had a primary seatbelt law the longest, states like California, Oregon, and Washington, also have the highest rate of seatbelt use, up to 96 to 97%. The one state, on the other hand, that doesn't have a seatbelt law at all, which is New Hampshire, has the lowest rate of seatbelt use, at 72%. Utah has had a secondary seatbelt law since 1986. But has only had a seatbelt use rate of between 82 and 83%. When the law takes effect as a primary offense in May 2015, the new law just passed this legislative session, the usage rate is expected to jump as much as 10 points. This is really exciting because it will definitely save Utah lives. We're delighted to have Representative Lee Perry here to tell us a little bit more about the change in the law.
I'd like to invite Captain McCleve and Assistant Chief Brown if they could come over here with me. I can tell you that First Substitute House Bill 79 was a monumental task to push forward through the legislature this year, but it was done for the right reasons, and now the Utah Foundation has come out and shared with you some reasons that we were able to promote and push during the session to pass this law. And I know there was a lot of different discussion that happened about this law, but there's three functions to public safety when it comes to traveling on our roadways. And first is engineering, and then there's enforcement, and there's education. Those three components work hand in hand together to keep people safe when they drive cars on our roadways. We obviously have to build our roads safely, but then we have to have law enforcement officers out there to enforce laws to keep everybody following certain rules so that we don't have crashes and have these kind of problems that occur out there. And of course, the last component is education. Utah's done a fantastic job of educating the motoring public as far as talking about seatbelt usage and talking about DUI and speed enforcement and all these different things. We've done a great job at education, but we haven't been able to combine them as well as we would like. And I think that's what First Substitute House Bill 79 does, is it allows us to use enforcement and education hand in hand. Not in a heavy-handed way, but in a way that will be able to promote the idea of promoting safety on our roadways by the use of seat belts. So what we've done in this bill is we've allowed that the first offense is a warning. When someone gets stopped, we're going to let law enforcement make that traffic stop, and we're going to encourage law enforcement to educate those people that this is important for them to put a seatbelt on and the reasons why. Then, after they get a second stop, they can be issued a citation. And that citation, they can have it alleviated if they want to go online and take a safety course that will be provided for them. It'll be an online course, and they can have the fine completely waived. The legislature felt like these were important aspects to take away the argument that people have, well, this is just a way for government to generate revenue. I, in my chosen profession in law enforcement, have never ever want out to generate revenue by writing citations. The entire purpose behind writing citations is to change behavior and get people to do things for the right reasons to protect their lives and to protect society. It was never ever to generate revenue, and that's why House Bill 79 was such an exciting concept to put that forward. It is a trial process, however. It's on a 3-year trial process to see where it goes, and we hope that we see, just what the Utah Foundation has talked about, that with the help of law enforcement, that what we will see at the end of these 3 years is that our seatbelt usage rate is up, our fatality rate is down, and that the public has now changed their mind and understands that wearing a seatbelt is just as important as not driving drunk, just as important as not speeding, just as important as not following too close, and all the other laws that we already have on the books. With that, I'd turn the time over to Chief Brown and Captain McCleve to answer any questions about how law enforcement is going to tackle this issue as far as going out and stopping individuals and using the educational component of giving warnings.
Thank you. You know, in my career, there are 2 or 3 events that really have stuck with me, and I remember many years ago, as a young officer, I was dispatched on a simple crash in a residential neighborhood. You know, 25 miles an hour. How bad could the crash be? As I drove to the crash, there was really no alarm. There was no urgency. But upon arriving, I saw a vehicle that had been overturned. The conditions were just right for that vehicle to be hit. Someone ran a stop sign, and this vehicle had been tripped and landed on its side. What I saw was a young girl being held by her father on the sidewalk as she passed away. Those images and those things really affected me. I can't help but think if she had been restrained, she'd be here today. And I really feel that we often think that that's going to happen to somebody else. In our busy lives, as we rush to the grocery store, as we go to school, or we're only in a residential neighborhood, that won't happen. Well, I'm here to tell you that does happen, and it can happen. Seatbelts save lives. That's a fact. And this is a great opportunity for us to partner with law enforcement, with our community, with the Utah Foundation, to make an impact in our communities and to see if we can't drive down those fatalities and those injury accidents. I was asked earlier if we were going to do some special training for this seatbelt enforcement, and this is one of those laws where it's very simple. What you see is what you get. If you see the seatbelt on someone, there's no need to stop them. If you see the seatbelt off, you can go ahead and stop them. But the nice thing, as Representative Lee talked about, this comes with an educational component. We can stop and talk with citizens and say, hey, please put your seatbelt on. The next time we may issue a citation, but again, it may be another time for us to remind the citizens or drivers to put those seatbelts on, because the fact is they do save lives.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Representative Perry, also known in our organization as Lieutenant Lee Perry with the Highway Patrol. But just a couple of things I want to cover in terms of the new seatbelt law and what it means for us, and I'll speak specifically for the Utah Highway Patrol. As you know, most of the things that we deal with are high-speed crashes on the interstates. That's what our role and responsibility mainly is within the state of Utah. And so as a result of that, of course, this new law is going to hopefully make a huge difference in terms of the number of fatalities. Typically, and what our average shows is that about just a little bit over 50% of the fatality crashes that the Utah Highway Patrol handles in a year, 50 to 52 or 3% of those who pass away are not restrained. And so we see this new law and the collaborative effort between a whole bunch of people to make this happen, which is pretty monumental for our state. But I think the statistics show that seatbelt usage will increase, and hopefully that will drive down the number of fatalities and serious injuries that occur. And I'll give you an example. Just within the last few days, we saw a crash up in Box Elder County where 5 people were in a car, a rollover. Two of the 5 were ejected from the vehicle. And we don't include in our statistic those who have serious injuries, not necessarily pass away, but have life-changing and life-altering experiences from these crashes by not being restrained. And so how the system will work, and I think this is important for people to understand, is the first offense, when somebody's pulled over and given a written warning, that information will be tracked, and then that will be provided to the Utah Driver License Division. when a law enforcement officer stops someone for not wearing a seatbelt, they will be able to check through the driver license to see whether or not that person has received a warning or not. If that's determined, then they will issue a citation, or they can issue a citation. And then that person can take the online course, as Representative Perry indicated, and the fine will be waived. And so for us, it's an opportunity, number one, to increase public safety. So far, our statistics show, and we track this very carefully in the Highway Patrol, we've handled 18 crashes. Well, 18 people have passed away to date on Utah highways that we've been involved with. 10 of the 18 people who passed away were not wearing seatbelts. And so we're hoping that with this new law, we can educate people and help them understand the importance of seatbelt use and hopefully save many more lives in the state. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions or however you want to do it, Dan.
Thank you very much, Representative Perry, Deputy Chief Brown, and Captain McCleve. Do you have questions for Melissa, our research analyst, for any of our law enforcement group?
I have a question for Melissa, actually.
Okay.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, you said that our DUIs are low, but a lot of times when there's accidents that people are on some kind of drug or medication. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're finding and how often it is?
You know, I don't have a lot more to tell you other than the stats. 25%, I think it was 2013, 25% of those in fatal accidents who were tested, I think it was 154, if I'm not mistaken, people that were tested positive for drugs. But again, that ranges from any kind of drug you can think of, so it's very difficult to determine if that particular drug played a factor in the motor vehicle crash. Nevertheless, you know, it includes methamphetamines and other things that, you know, you might be able to draw the conclusion that there was some interference in the driving.
One thing that came up in Melissa's research for this, but I'd love to have her talk about, the history of Utah Foundation's research in this area. What you found as you dug through our files here.
Yeah, it actually turns out that the Utah Foundation does a report on traffic safety about every 30 years. I think that's kind of been by accident almost, but the Utah Foundation put out a report on traffic safety in 1955. At the time, there was a vigorous debate nationwide regarding driver education, specifically driver education programs at the high school level. And that vigorous debate was happening in Utah as well. And the 1955 report that Utah Foundation put out made some recommendations about beefing up the high school education. And then what was fun is that in the 1983 report on traffic safety, we found that the young drivers were doing much better and that those driving education programs at the high school level had been improved. And I don't know if the researcher, at the time these reports didn't list an author, and I don't know if the author was trying to be tongue-in-cheek, but said something about the fact that the young drivers in Utah are doing better, but maybe the older drivers need some education themselves. In 1983, there was a real concern about drunk driving in Utah. 28.5% of fatal accidents in Utah were attributable to drunk driving, and the numbers now are more like 9%. So we've seen in the last 30 years a huge improvement in drunk driving, partly for the reasons that Representative Lee Perry mentioned. There's been a huge outreach by many different groups, from Mothers Against Drunk Driving to police enforcement, and strict laws as well. Utah has some of the strictest impaired driving laws in the country.
So then, if you do one 30 years from now, what's the thing that you hope to see then? Is there going to be one thing that you're like, yes, we fixed that?
Boy, that's hard. Predictions 30. Right, zero fatalities, exactly. Zero fatalities. I don't know. I mean, you know, speech-to-text programs, those voice interaction programs are becoming very popular in cars, and I think we need to be careful. Given my research into cognitive distraction, I think we need to be careful about unintended consequences. with technology changing so rapidly and, you know, driving at such high speeds, I think caution is always a good motto.
Do you have any questions for our officers?
I want to do some one-on-one.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you again very much for coming. If you haven't gotten a copy of our summary here, I can provide that to you. The full report will be attached to a press release. It'll go out by email in just a few minutes and will be available on our website almost as we speak, but very soon in any case. So thank you again for coming, and there are more to come. We have a full research agenda this year, and we'll be letting you know what we're studying as we go forward.